Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTB World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important stories. The first is, of course, in reference to the current economic situation of the country, which seems a bit hopeful, especially after the agreement that has been reached with the IMF, supported, of course, by an SPA, which is going to span over a period of 9 months. This is still subject to approval by the executive board, but there's good news coming in from Pakistan, at least for now, in terms of the impact that this has had on, of course, the Pakistan Stock Exchange. Just yesterday, we saw the record one-day gain that the stock exchange witnessed in about 15 years, and that's of course important also in terms of where the country is heading. And then again, we also saw today that the rupee also appreciated against the dollar, and that's of course also something which is really important, and it's one of the indicators that has been quoted for quite some time now in terms of the kind of stresses that the people have had to face. Whether or not this is going to be something that is in fact sustainable, that we're going to see a good stable value coming through, and how far long we're going to go ahead with the way that the direction of the country needs to move, especially in terms of ensuring that we do in fact get the $3 billion with the staff level agreement from the IMF, are compliant in terms of the kind of measures that need to be taken within this time frame, and then of course in terms of our bilateral engagements are able to enhance perhaps even more inflow coming in from the country, especially in terms of our engagements with countries like Saudi Arabia and China and the rest, and manage our external debt financing as well. So these are going to be important challenges in the fiscal year ahead, and especially in terms of the first 9 months as to how Pakistan will want to move ahead. The ratings agencies such as Moody's are still talking about the lingering effects and the fact that Pakistan will of course be facing numerous challenges, even though the staff level agreement has been achieved, because there is about $25 billion in debt payment that has to be made, and it's a huge number for Pakistan. It seems that the government is confident that the current account reserves are going to be about 14 billion by August. Whether or not that is something that actually does happen and the impact that's going to have on the economy is also important. So we're going to take a look at where we stand currently today and what sort of measures need to be taken at the moment urgently in terms of whatever medium to long-term strategy is in place, and how we bring in more investment in the country to ensure that the country is in fact moving in the direction that is required, especially keeping in view that this may be the election year as well, and the kind of political instability that the country is unfortunately witnessing for quite some time now. In our second segment, we're going to be taking a look at the development in Gilgit-Baltistan, where the Chief Court has disqualified the Chief Minister, Mr. Khalid Khurshid. He's a leader of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, and this has been done under Article 62 and 63 of the Constitution for holding a fake degree. Earlier, the Higher Education Commission had issued an equivalence letter, which was then withdrawn after the verification from the University of London of the documents that had been submitted by the former Chief Minister. Now, in terms of course, what is there in the application, and because the university has denied the authenticity of those documents, the HEC then withdrew the equivalence letter that was in fact issued to him, and so subsequently we know that the court has announced under Article 62 and 63 that he is disqualified from his post, something that his lawyer has argued does not apply to Gilgit-Baltistan, but we're going to be taking a look into this in further detail and try to understand this particular case, and then of course the impact that it's going to have in the region. For this and more, as always, in the studios I have been joined by senior analyst Farooq Patafi. We've also been joined by Mr. Ali Salman, who's the executive director at Prime Institute. We've also been joined by Dr. Ali Hasnain, assistant professor of economics at LUMS. Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Let me start with you, Mr. Ali Salman. The situation, of course, in terms of where we stand today, especially after the staff level agreement with the IMF, seems hopeful. The stock exchange, of course, the numbers coming in from there are also encouraging, and then of course the rupee's value is also something that points in a good direction. But of course one worries in terms of when the next shoe is going to drop, or whether or not there is going to be sustainable good news for the country. How far do you think that the gains that we see at the moment are going to be able to sustain themselves, and that Pakistan will in fact then move in the direction that one can hope for?
Well, I think you have provided an excellent summary and introduction and the context, Sana, for this development. I'd like to start with quoting Prime Minister himself, who said yesterday that it's IMF staff level agreement is not a moment of pride, but a moment of concern that we reached very close to a situation where the IMF program was expiring, and technically it did expire on 30th of June, but then we got a lifeline from IMF in terms of the standby agreement for next 9 months. So I'm cautiously optimistic, as I would like to say, in the sense that it is definitely going to provide a very temporary and transient breathing space for our fiscal policy managers, for our economic managers, in terms of policy direction, in terms of keeping the program as according to the sound fiscal policy. But also importantly, it is important to learn that we are not intervening in the foreign exchange market. Also, we have assured IMF that we will not be restricting the imports anymore. These were the measures, these were the steps which unfortunately the current government took in last 6 months, which in my view have caused significant problems in terms of our growth outlook as well as macroeconomic stability. Now, with the IMF standby agreement hopefully going to be approved by the board on 12th of July, we will be having some cushion and as an anchor to sail through. Now, the immediate challenge, of course, is that we just passed the budget for this fiscal year, and also government missed the tax collection target in last year. So we hope that we maintain the discipline in terms of not only the tax target, but also more importantly the structural reforms. We have been hearing about tax reforms, although I did not see any tax reforms. We only saw increase in tax rates, by the way, which was in line with demand of IMF, which I don't agree with. I think Pakistan definitely needs to reduce the tax rate at this point in time to broaden the tax base, but this is something which we have been avoiding. Also, if you see the burden on the middle class has been increased, as well as the corporate income has been taxed further. So in terms of the sustainability, as you asked, this depends a lot on the steps which the government takes in next 3 months. But the tricky thing, of course, is the election around the corner. And we hope that the government somehow able to maintain the discipline in terms of its development and current spending. And also, let me remind you, not intervene in either the import market or forex exchange market. Those will be important factors to not only unlock the flows from bilateral. A lot has been talked about that once we have the board approval from IMF, it will unlock the flows from bilateral and multilateral sources and will provide some level of comfort for friendly countries. That is all good. But importantly, we have to think about revival of exports proceeds, which have been going down last year, and also increase of remittance income back through the formal channel, which we have also lost in last year. Both proceeds were declined about by 10%. So these are the channels of external of dollar income that we need to revive, so that Pakistan is able to meet its external debt obligations in next 1 year.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Adi Hussain, the situation, of course, in terms of what lies ahead is going to be tough, regardless of whether we get the staff level agreement forward or not. But in terms of the certainty with which, of course, we're talking about this, can you help me understand that the fact that this is subject to the board's approval, is that something that is a given and will be more of a procedural formality that has to be completed in order for us to be able to gain this advantage?
So I think we can't foresee the future exactly, but it is highly likely that approval will go through. It is normally taken as a given that when the staff in the country reaches an agreement, that most of times is followed by an approval by the board. It is potentially something that could there could be discussions around. But I think, given the fact that the discussions with the IMF have gone for, have been quite extended in terms of, or quite protracted rather, it's likely, I think, that we will see an approval come in. But again, we can't say for sure, of course, until it happens.
Right, absolutely. Farooq, just yesterday we were talking about how this 9 months time period at least gives us some sort of way forward and direction, irrespective of the change of government and whatever sort of political situation may be. But do you think that the way that we have seen the political instability in the past and the potential instability that may come if elections are held within this time period as well, then wouldn't that also add to the kind of problems that the government is already facing, and how will then that be translated into whatever path is laid out? Do you think that that will, irrespective of the change of government, stay as it is?
All right, Sana, thank you very much for this question. And I think that when you talk about Pakistan's history of economic progress, it has two very important or interesting aspects. One, it is a competition between natural or environmental or international crises and self-made or self-inflicted, wounds or injuries. We have been harming ourselves repeatedly in the past, and we have seen what exactly happened on May 9th, right? Similarly, this idea of having a caretaker government between two governments during the election period is also something that is self-harm. Because for a very limited period of time, you get a cabinet that sets policy, but only for 3 months or 2 months, that is the limit, and they cannot do anything beyond that. So that also actually creates a lot of problems, and after that you have a new government, and that new government is usually thought to be coming in with their own manifesto promises, although hardly anybody believes in manifestos when it comes to Pakistan's politics. But the second aspect that is amazing is it is a competition between our two desires. One, for the macroeconomic stability, to actually ensure that the country doesn't have the kind of fiscal deficit we repeatedly keep on returning to. And the second one is growth. These are essentially competing values, right? You cannot grow, or you might want to grow, but in effect, till the time you don't get all the fundamentals right, you cannot actually aspire to go for the growth that is going to actually help you, right? And this has been a competition, and unfortunately, because remember, Faiz, kuch ishq kiya, kuch kaam kiya, and they kept on clashing, So these two values keep on clashing, and this time at least we know where we are at. We have been we literally almost hit the rock bottom in recent months. But after that, the good news is that the political instability that you were talking about is almost over. Perhaps once again, due to May 9th or whatever happened that day, that actually exposed all the people who were actually bringing in man-made shocks to the system. So right now we keep on hearing about a grand national dialogue, and then we keep on hearing about Charter of Democracy was signed when both ruling parties were in exile and establishment was ruling the country. Now we hear that all major parties that are part of the system, and then the country's armed forces and other institutions are also going to chip in when it comes to a grander, charter of democracy in the country. If that happens, that means that we will settle economic matters as well. The issues regarding all these SOEs that we keep on talking about will be settled also. So eventually, I think we are moving in the right direction. And because there is a cushion of 9 months, it takes care of our self-inflicted wound, that is caretaker government, because that doesn't have any kind of powers in truth. So at that time, economy, if it starts sinking, it could have created a lot of problems.
All right. Mr. Ali Salman, the situation, of course, is something that we can understand is at least giving us some sort of breathing space and the ability to move forward. But a lot of people have also started complaining about how this has resulted into perhaps even more difficulties for the people and have been critical of this particular agreement with the IMF. And of course, the difficulties have continued for the people, and as you said, perhaps have increased as well and will likely do so in the future too. But how do we make the people understand that this is something that is necessary, and then also facilitate them within this time period to help support them within this crisis? I understand that the inflation is better than what it was in May, perhaps, but the policy rate is still at 22%. The inflation is still pretty high. How do we then manage what the people's concerns as to the difficulties in their lives?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point. Before I address this issue of the economic priorities from people's perspective, I'd like to highlight what Farooq Muttafi Sahab was saying just in his remarks, and that is a sort of this conflict between different economic priorities which Pakistan has faced in the past, and that is always very visible, especially when there are competing political interests, each having a different kind of vision of how Pakistan's economy needs to be managed or governed. And I think in that context, there has been an increasing demand for a charter of economy in which some level of agreements can be developed which can assure stability. Why we are talking about an IMF program? Because IMF program provides us an anchor, a framework, and discipline various governments to actually follow through a certain set of goals, and that provides a stability. But beyond that, obviously, when we talk about people's concern, we need to talk about job losses. We need to talk about inflation, and those are the two most important challenges which we have faced in last 1 year. Significant unemployment rate. Now we have witnessed also historically high inflation rate has been witnessed. Now both of them can be easily traced to specific policy interventions and in wrong set of policy which we pursued. First of all, we need to ensure that we are supporting the industrial growth. We are supporting the manufacturing sector through an open trade policies, which we are not. When we restrict import, we are also curbing exports, and we are also curbing the entire industrial process, which we have unfortunately done, which contains the source of high level of unemployment which we see across the country today. Secondly, since Pakistan heavily depends on imports, when you restrict the supply of goods, then it also results into the price escalation which we have seen. It affects the exchange rate. Our intervention in the exchange rate affects it makes the dollar too expensive, and then it affects the prices of all the goods that we consume. Energy, as a good has been, the price has been increasing, unfortunately, without an increase in the quality and reliability of a service. So these are the factors which are affecting everyone's households, everyone's budget, and we need to definitely give top priority to these concerns, whichever government forms the next. Wins the next elections.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Ali Hassan, the SPP chief has talked about how there is going to be a plan of bringing down the inflation to at least 5 to 7% in the next 2 years, and he's talked about how this may be something that seems ambitious to some, but that he's pretty confident that there's something that is achievable. What do you think about this particular target, and whether or not this is something that can easily be achieved in 2 years, and what needs to be done to do that?
So first of all, I think if you look at the levels of inflation that we've had in the last few years, and also the targets that the State Bank had previously set, it hasn't been able to control inflation according to those targets in the past. So this idea that we'll have inflation at 5% it seems to me to be a little too ambitious. In fact, in the last couple of days, it's been widely reported that inflation has fallen, and you mentioned this a few minutes ago. In fact, what has happened is that the year-on-year inflation has reduced, which means that when we compare June this year to June last year, inflation has fallen, not because we've had a decrease in inflation today, but because there was a jump in inflation last year between May and June. So when we compare May to May last year versus June to June May last year to June to May this year versus June last year to June this year, there's a difference because of that increase last year, not because prices are falling right now. Prices are quite high, and in fact, because we are now in an IMF program, we will have to be more disciplined with our energy prices in particular, which suggests that inflation is likely to remain high unless there is some sort of good news in terms of the commodity cycle globally, and that's something that we'll see. Fundamentally, though, the focus has to be on debt management, because in the next 3 years we have to pay back something like $76 billion. There's no really realistic path for us to do that. And so we have to go into debt restructuring. It's something that we should have gone into already, but it's something that the next government will have to take on much more seriously. In fact, if you look at the last 3 odd years, there's been a lack of sort of seriousness shown by both the present and the previous government in taking on the structural reforms that will allow us to have sort of better businesses and sort of better business outcomes and growth, along with lower inflation. That sort of magic outcome of both things happening at the same time, low inflation and better growth, can only come through structural reforms, which has been ignored. And unfortunately, our politics has been built around the idea of short-term relief, both if you look at the fuel subsidy of the last government, or if you look at the actions of the present government. There has been a sort of this tension, if you will, or this lack of eagerness to take on the disciplined actions that we need to do, which would raise prices and therefore create pain today, but might mean relief to tomorrow, the day after, and so on, going forward. So, as Pitafi Saab said earlier, really the question before all of us right now is, how will the next government will it show the type of seriousness that it needs to show? And that remains to be seen.
Right. Dr. Ali, I want to get a clarification regarding what you proposed is important in terms of debt restructuring for the country, and perhaps this is something that the government previously also has been hesitant to do so. There was some talk regarding bilateral debt restructuring, but moving forward also there's a lot of hope in terms of inflow coming in from our bilateral engagements, and of course other ways to move forward with our external repayments. Why do you propose that debt restructuring is something that the government needs to go for?
Right. So first of all, let's just understand some of the numbers. In the next 3 years, we have to pay $76 billion in foreign currency denominated loans. That means we have to generate an average of about $25 billion additional to our import bills every year that we can then spend on that debt if we were to go about it normally. One way to do that, as you mentioned, is to have substantial new investments come in. The government launched this economic revival plan a couple of weeks ago, the Special Investment Facilitation Council, I believe it's called. And that was sort of government ministers came on and projected that there'll be something like, I think, $25 billion raised in the near term through that initiative. That's just a very large number. So for context, if you look at how much Pakistan has had incoming investments in CPEC, that's roughly the same size. It's in the last 10 years, we've had about, I think, $26 billion of CPEC investments. So for us to imagine that we'll have as many investments as we've had in 10 years of CPEC within the next year is a little bit, it's ambitious. It's perhaps a little too ambitious. And so and Ali Salman is a close colleague, and he and I have both had these conversations with debt restructuring experts who've walked us through this conversation on The fact that we have, just the numbers, because the numbers don't add up, you have to negotiate and think of ways where you can maybe extend the tenure of the term of your loan, but then make it more feasible for us to pay them. Now, if the government is able to raise the type of investments that it's talked about, then of course that changes the equation. But the proof is in the pudding, and so we'll see if that happens. Short of that, and that's very, in my view at least, it's a little unrealistic, a little too ambitious. Debt restructuring is the only other way for us to avoid being back in the situation we were in last week repeatedly in the next 3 years, which will be too costly for us to bear.
All right. And Farooq, I'd like your take on that as well, and also add to that the role of the SIFC, because you seem very hopeful in terms of the kind of investment that possibly can bring to the country pretty soon also.
Right, absolutely, Sanam. But before that, I was just reflecting on something that, we were talking about numbers, and numbers seem to play some kind of game with us. Remember 40 under 40 fortune list, right? So similarly, I was just looking at the number of programs that we have gone for in IMF, and that is 23, and this is year 23. So a little bit earlier, Dr. Ali Hasnan was talking about, $76 billion that we owe to the world in the next 3 years, and this is the 76th year of our existence. So I thought that somehow the numbers actually, when they actually start rhyming, it is a wake-up call. So they are asking us to wake up. But right now, let me start with one thing that Dr. Hasnan actually talked about. This addiction to the idea of relief. Do you know why does this happen? And usually this relief comes from the federal government, right? There is the first tier, the highest tier, right? That is because of lack of governance or bad governance in the country or ineptness. Remember that when you have no other structure or no method to control or ensure that there are targeted subsidies or relief, then what happens? You open a faucet at the top because it throws water all around. So you have a small bucket and you continue with that faucet because then some water will fill in the bucket, right? So at this moment, this is exactly what is happening. Other people keep on benefiting from, subsidies that should go to the very poor. Now, the best thing to do is to improve the standards of governance. And that means three tiers. Unfortunately, we have 2 tiers, third one is absent, right? So what you have to do is you have to start with a scalpel and you have to keep on cutting fat, and you have to ensure that whosoever actually works for the government of Pakistan or provincial government or local government, they should be giving the 100%. Can that be possible? I think it is. But you'll have to be more focused, and that's why we need consensus. Now, regarding the monies and your question about SIFC, if I'm not forgotten, something very interesting happened. I cannot actually reveal the details because there is a Chatham House rule, but I spent 15 days in Quetta, remember? I was part of a national workshop, Balochistan, and I got the opportunity to actually talk not only with the political leadership, but military leadership and intelligence leadership as well. And one thing, Sana, that was amazing, the clarity of focus on economic development for the country. Everybody realizes, every person, they have very detailed understanding of economic matters, and it was something that was lacking in certain previous examples, but very comprehensive understanding of how economy can be improved. And then this aspect also that somehow, call it good, call it bad, but in the Arab world, our army roles a very important role in convincing that Pakistan is a target for investment, right? So the numbers, not from the military side, but from the political side that we kept on hearing, is not $25 billion. It is 4 investors with $25 billion apiece. If that is something that can be brought into the country, you will be astounded by the results. Remember, you are not merely talking about the money that is going to come, but the kind of economic activity it can generate in the country. And remember, I've traveled across the country, all nooks and crannies in this country, from Siachen to Gawada and everywhere, right? And I can tell you one thing that is amazing about this country. It is so full of resources, so full of capable people, and yet we see that we are 23 and 23. That means we keep on ending up with IMF. So something was not going right, but now I think that we had this sobering moment on May 9th, and whatever has happened in past 2-3 years, especially past 1 year that we have experienced, I think we'll be able to find our way out. It is like India's story. In 1990s, India just had that moment of truth, and then it kept on racing ahead and hasn't looked back. So we will be doing that as well.
All right. And I know you want to add to that, Ali Sama, but let me just pose a question too, and then you can add to that as well. Speaking of the Arab world, there's also another development that the SBP chief talked about in terms of linking our payment system with the cross-border payment system of the Arab Monetary Fund, which is, if I'm not mispronouncing it, called BUNA, which is something that perhaps is a possibility for Pakistan also to help with its reserves. Do you think that this is a good idea forward and will help us economically? And add to whatever you wanted to add previously.
Right. No, thank you. I have not looked at this development in details, but I'd just like to comment that any alternative currency arrangements which reduces our exposure to dollars needs to be looked seriously. But all of these arrangements have to be backed by the flow of goods and services. You see, when we talk about alternative currency arrangement, we have been hearing about BRICS, for instance. We almost must remember that this followed the trade flows itself. So if our trade flow is with the US or with EU, then of course the choice of the currency is a bilateral matter. So that's important to be remembered. Now I think Farooq Patapi has brought an interesting play with numbers, but I just like to. Being an economist, unfortunately, it's a professional hazard, I would say, to bring some pessimism here. And then out of 23 programs, we have only completed 1 program. And
I was adding to pessimism, by the way. I was not being optimistic regarding this number.
You were being very optimistic with the $100 billion which you brought in just
but there are two different stories. Remember, I was just merely pointing out that there is this irony that we keep on ending with this kind of situation, but from horse's mouth, from our policymakers, we heard this number. It is amazing. It is not my optimism, it is theirs.
Yeah, I mean, we have, so important thing to remember again, that what are the terms and conditions when we talk about these investments plans. So with CPAC, we had a very high level of optimism just 10 years ago. Remember the phrase game changer.
Yeah.
Now, yes, it
we
would
changed
have
game, but something else happened.
Something else happened. Now we are also, the liabilities are also coming up. So every investment have to be understood in terms of the payments made back to the investor. So unless the investor sees that as a business opportunity, and unless we are confident about our own economy, industry, agriculture, to be able to sustain that level of investment and then recover, then produce those level of returns, it cannot happen. The investments have to be looked in from return perspective. Secondly, just one follow-up point here, and we'll come back to investment, is the issue of debt restructuring. Just a quick comment that one thing we must be very conscious is always bringing the dimension of public spending here. Let's not assume that we can just always go to the external resources for more and more loans, but let's also put our own house in order by reducing public spending wherever it is possible.
Right. Farooq, you want to add something?
I just wanted to, because twice CPAC has been brought up, and I think that originally it was a great opportunity. The problem actually was that at that time the country was going through something else, and it was a power meltdown. We had outages, ranging from 12 hours to 18 hours throughout the country. And at that time, perhaps we could have done it better or negotiated better, but we ended up actually investing a lot of energy in energy projects, right? And which were, early harvest projects, but they came with a price tag. And this is why we are worried about this escalating cost of all these things. But with due respect, right now we are not talking about something like that. We are talking about divesting and getting rid of various assets which are practically doing nothing. For example, UAE is interested in Karachi's port, right? Similarly, our airports, umpteen other opportunities. So I think in coming days, even when China comes up with more investment, it is going to be not in infrastructure just, but also in businesses. So that changes the dynamic of things, because then job creation takes place.
Right. Let's also include Mr. Ali Hussain in the discussion, and you can add to whatever is being talked about. But also, when we talk about investment, of course, given the current economic challenges that the country is facing, there seem to be certain incentives that the government wanted to provide as part of the budget as well, especially in terms of development projects and the IT sector. But how exactly will this be pitched to the investors, both of course, within the local community and the private sector, and externally outside of Pakistan as well, for us to move forward, given the current restraints that we have? Do you think that the IMF staff level agreement actually changes that situation, and there must be some sort of increase in trust? The PSX numbers surely point towards that direction, but is it enough for investment to come in?
So let me step back a little bit first, and let's keep our focus on the core fundamental problem that we've had for years and years now. So fundamentally, Pakistan is dollar poor. That means that our economy is not small. It's a fairly large economy for a developing country. Our income has been growing in even dollar terms over the last few decades, and certainly in rupee terms. The core issues are one, that we've not raised our human development enough, but fundamentally the acute crises that we suffer are because we are not doing a good job of generating dollars in this country, right? So when we talk about how to fix that crisis, we have to fundamentally re-engineer how manufacturing and industry is operating in this country. Our current factories include substantial factories that are useless for the purpose of generating dollars. They're here only for domestic production, and in fact, they have systematic incentives that push them towards only appealing to the domestic market. And this is something, for example, that the World Bank had a detailed report on last year, very good work, very rigorous work that argued this. Now, that is the type of structural reform, so that requires us to completely reevaluate both our tax code and our customs, sort of our commercial rules and regulations. But that is a re-engineering of our manufacturing that will take time. It's not going to happen overnight, which is where these investments are important. I think when we want to think about investments, it's important to be realistic, because when we think about the expertise that this country has, I would disagree with Pitafi Saab that we have substantial expertise in the government in economic matters. This is something that, of course, I've dealt with for more than a decade on a day-to-day basis. And we still don't have the sort of plan. So he mentioned a very nice example of India. But if you look at the Indian reforms of '91, they had substantial expertise, people who had been in the bureaucracy, in the economic ministries and the commerce ministries for the last 10 years, drawing up the plans for how India would undergo this transformation. That's the type of homework that we still need. And we're still, even though we've been in crisis for years, haven't drawn up serious and detailed plans for how to go through that transformation. So we're still really trading in generalities, in sloganeering. There is certainly potential for investments. As he mentioned, We can go, we can sell assets such as the Karachi port, such as airports and so on, or lease them out. But then we have to stop and think, why aren't these assets already delivering? The reason they're not already delivering is that we have a gridlock in our legal system. We have a gridlock in our bureaucratic system. Do we think that that gridlock will go away just because foreign investment is coming in? That's number one. Number two, we have to understand that investments that come in are a short-term fix. Until we fix this anti-export bias in our home industries, in domestic industries, we will be, even if we start selling off our assets, we will be back in the same position because our trade deficit will continue. We'll keep leaking dollars, and it will be like injecting blood into someone who's bleeding out from another side of the body, right? So that's not going to be useful. It's a momentary benefit that we can take a breather from, as the Prime Minister put it recently, but it will only work if we have a rational plan for moving forward, and that has been missing so far.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Ali Hassan, for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Ali Salman, for being a part of the discussion. I know, Farooq, you have something to add to that, but very quickly, because we'll have to move on to the next segment.
Actually, I wanted to apologize to the audience and Dr. Ali Hassan also, and Ali Salman Sahab. Maybe I'm saying something and it is not coming out the way it is supposed to, because they keep on misreading what I'm saying. I'm not saying that our governance system is A-OK. I actually talked about practically incompetence in the system, right? So that will have to be fixed. But honestly, when it comes to privatization, this is the grand idea, that you get rid of all those assets that are not being handled by you. It is not government's job to actually run businesses. When they are privatized, private investors actually come with their own scalpel and they take care of everything. If there is a fat inefficiency, they take care of that as well. We have one example, actually many examples. PTCL is one example. Similarly, our private banks are an example, which were privatized in 1990s. They are making money and they are very profitable. And job creation is also going on. So why can't this happen elsewhere? I hope it does.
All right, absolutely. We're going to quickly move on to the next segment, in which we're going to talk about what is going on in Gilgit-Baltistan, the disqualification of the CM, Mr. Khalid Khurshid, with reference to a fake decree and under Articles 62 and 63 of the Constitution. Farooq, this is important not only in terms of course, what the court has talked about, but also in terms of the role that the HEC had to play in this, and then what is then being spoken about in terms of whether or not these laws actually apply to Gilgit-Baltistan or not. First, your take on this matter in general, and then what exactly needs to be done when we talk about issues such as these springing up, and the impact that that's going to have on the political dynamics of the region.
Right. First of all, Sana, regarding this whole episode, I mean, this whole story of fake degree and the way HEC actually ended up kind of certifying and then withdrew that, is actually, this is something that holds mirror to our institutional capacity, right? Somebody actually with a fake degree makes it so high, becomes head of chief executive of an important unit of the country, right? And then HEC kind of first actually concedes and then withdraws. That is a reflection enough, I think. Regarding 62, 63, it was their chief court actually that decided on this matter. So what exactly is there to be said when their own, Gilgit-Baltistan's own court has actually invoked this interpretation? I think there is no flaw in this. Now regarding the gentleman himself, I think that this is an example of how karma actually gets you. The way he was playing fast and loose because of politics with such an important unit, right? Such an important entity. And he kept on using his own privilege to further the PTI's politics as well. I understand that that might not be connected with this episode or this decision, but that also is something that is there in the ether, right? That's why I brought up karma, not any kind of legal consequences of that. But unfortunately, because it is a highly sought after region, and India keeps on actually putting out claims after claims. It is very important that we have this in order as well. And somebody who is a loose cannon, who doesn't understand, cannot tell the difference between national interest and his personal interest or political interest, is someone who is not fit to rule there. But of course, it is in the end a decision of the people of that region whenever they elect the next prime minister, the next CM. That is their lookout. But for now, I think that it is what it is, and I think that the chief court has actually ruled according to law. Regarding region and Gilgit-Baltistan, there are many positives as well that were part of the policy, especially finding alternative routes for tourism in Gilgit-Baltistan. So I think and I hope in coming days, whosoever is the next chief executive of the entity called Gilgit-Baltistan actually finds a way to ensure, build on the positives and gets rid of the negatives.
What do you think is next for GB politics, especially in terms of the parties involved?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see, Sana, because at this moment, first the person is unseated, and then you have to have, internal, politicking that takes place. We have seen the example of Kashmir, which is also closely linked to Gilgit-Baltistan. There we saw that one prime minister was unseated because of similar kind of a contempt of court case. And after that, we thought that the same party is actually going to come up with, the next prime minister. But something very interesting happened. A forward bloc was created, and that was with the endorsement of the leadership of the party, and that actually ended up aligning with the ruling parties at the center in Pakistan. And they created a government there. So that is a possibility that might also happen there. Usually what happens is, the federal elections are reflected in the follow-up elections in both Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. So in coming days, I think the kind of consensus government we have at center, I'm hoping to see something similar in Gilgit-Baltistan as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Farooq, for that. And with that, we come to the end of the show. That's all that we have. We'll see you tomorrow with more news from Pakistan and around the world.